spent in a miserable way.
For decades, he didn't give up trying to ID a boy in his Ki11er. The obsession Major. Tim Horn, Major. Tim Horn, 4 years Major. Tim Horn had he didn't move the box, because it was in his dam. The box was stuffed full of information about a cold case of the worst kind, the killing of a child, and he just had to solve it. The investigator for the Sheriff's Department in Orange County, North Carolina, put off his retirement for months, until last week, hoping he could get final answers in the 1998 killing of a 10-year-old boy. He wanted resolution, he said, not just for the family, but for himself. He had investigated this. The boy's remains were discovered in September 1998 by a maintenance crew doing yard work. Horn came to the scene.
Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.